Like, subscribe, and hype the video. Also, leave a comment on any topics you want to hear about in the future. Okay, let's dive in. In our last episode, we walked through exactly what NASA's DART mission actually did, deliberately crashing a spacecraft into an asteroid moonlet and successfully shifting its orbit by 32 minutes, proving for the first time in history that humanity could actually redirect a dangerous space rock. But almost immediately after that success was announced, a very different conversation started spreading online. Today, we're diving straight into the conspiracy theories surrounding DART, claims that it was secretly a weapons test, claims that the results were faked or wildly exaggerated, and claims that NASA is hiding something far bigger about the real reason this mission happened. By the end of this video, we'll walk through what the actual evidence says about every single one of them, and the answer might not be quite what either side expects. This is by far the most common DART conspiracy theory, and on the surface, it's easy to understand why people land on it. The basic claim goes like this: deliberately steering a spacecraft into a target at 14,000 miles per hour and successfully altering its trajectory is, technically speaking, the exact same physics used in a kinetic weapon, meaning some believers argue that DART wasn't really about planetary defense at all, but a publicly funded cover story for testing offensive space-based weapons technology, potentially intended for use against satellites, space stations, or even targets here on Earth. It's true that the underlying physics of a kinetic impactor and a kinetic weapon are fundamentally the same. Momentum transfer through a high-speed collision is momentum transfer, regardless of the target. But here's where the theory runs into trouble. DART's mission design, target selection, encounter velocity, and entire operational profile were published in extensive detail across multiple peer-reviewed scientific papers, mission planning documents, and public NASA briefings years before the mission even launched. Real weapons development programs, both historically and currently, are characterized specifically by classification and secrecy. DART was the opposite of that from day one. Openly published, openly tracked by independent astronomers and space agencies around the world, and openly verified by ground-based telescopes with no connection to NASA whatsoever. A genuinely secret weapons test wouldn't realistically be announced years in advance, broadcast live to the public, and independently verified by foreign space agencies and amateur astronomers using their own equipment, which is exactly what happened here. Like, subscribe, and hype the video, and let's get into the next claim, because this one gets even more specific. This next theory claims that the headline result, a 32-minute shift in Dimorphos's orbital period, was either fabricated outright or significantly exaggerated by NASA to make the mission look more successful than it actually was, possibly to help justify the program's continued funding. Here's the problem with this claim, and it's a fairly simple one. NASA wasn't the only organization measuring Dimorphos's orbit after the impact. Independent observatories around the world, including facilities not operated or funded by NASA at all, in countries with no stake in promoting the success of an American space agency mission, tracked the asteroid's brightness changes using their own telescopes and independently calculated very similar orbital shift results, landing within the same general range NASA had announced. The European Space Agency also later launched a dedicated follow-up mission called Hera, specifically designed to travel to the Didymos system and directly examine Dimorphos up close, partly to independently verify the details of what DART's impact actually did to the asteroid's shape, mass, and orbit. A result that's been independently confirmed by unrelated international observatories and is currently in the process of being physically re-examined by an entirely separate space agency's spacecraft. Is a difficult thing to fabricate convincingly. You'd essentially need multiple unconnected scientific institutions around the world to either be in on the same deception or independently make the exact same fabricated mistake, which becomes statistically implausible the more independent sources you add into the mix. This version of the theory takes a slightly different angle. Rather than claiming DART itself was fake, This theory suggests that the real motivation behind the mission was that NASA had already secretly identified a genuinely dangerous asteroid on a collision course with Earth, and that DART was rushed into action as an emergency real-world test, disguised publicly as a routine science experiment, to prepare for an actual impending impact that the public hasn't been told about. This theory runs into a fairly significant timeline problem. DART's target, its mission design, its launch date, and its entire test plan were finalized and published years before the actual 2022 impact. The mission concept itself dates back to proposals discussed as early as 2011 and 2012, long before the spacecraft was even built, let alone launched. Near-Earth object tracking data, including the orbits of essentially every known potentially hazardous asteroid, is published publicly and updated continuously by NASA's Center for Near-Earth Object Studies, and cross-checked independently by other tracking organizations, like the European Space Agency's own NEO Coordination Center. For this theory to be true, it would require a coordinated, multi-year, multi-agency, multinational cover-up involving thousands of scientists across competing and even rival countries, all maintaining consistent silence about a finding that, by its very nature, would directly threaten their own families, governments, and countries just as much as anyone else's, a level of coordinated secrecy that becomes harder to believe the more people you'd actually need involved in keeping it quiet. Like, subscribe and hype the video, and stick around, because there's one more claim worth addressing, and it's a little different from the others. This last claim isn't really a conspiracy theory in the traditional sense. It's more of a skeptical question some people genuinely ask. If asteroid impacts are so rare, why did NASA spend hundreds of millions of dollars testing a defense against something that statistically might never happen during any of our lifetimes? This is actually a fair question, and it has a real, documented answer. In February 2013, a previously undetected asteroid roughly 59 feet across entered Earth's atmosphere over Chelyabinsk, Russia, exploding with the force of roughly 20 to 30 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs in the upper atmosphere. The resulting shockwave shattered windows and damaged buildings across the region, injuring over 1,500 people, almost entirely from broken glass and debris. That object was never detected in advance, because it approached from a direction close to the sun's glare, making it effectively invisible to ground-based telescopes until it was already entering the atmosphere. Events like this are a sobering reminder that our current detection systems, while improving every year, still have real blind spots. And the entire purpose of programs like DART is to make sure that if and when we do detect something dangerous with enough advance warning, the response capability already exists and has been tested, rather than being invented under pressure during an actual emergency. It's less about responding to a known current threat, and more about not being caught unprepared for a threat we simply haven't spotted yet. So here's where all four of these theories actually land. The secret weapons test claim runs directly into the fact that the mission's entire design was public, peer-reviewed, and independently tracked years in advance. The faked results claim runs into independent international verification, plus an entirely separate follow-up mission currently in progress specifically to recheck the data. The hidden real threat claim runs into a documented, years-long public planning timeline that simply doesn't match the story. And the why bother testing this at all question, while a fair one to ask, has a genuinely well-documented real-world answer in the form of the 2013 Chelyabinsk event. None of this means healthy skepticism toward government agencies or large institutions is automatically a bad instinct. Asking how do we actually know this is true is exactly the right question to ask about any major claim, including the ones in this video. The difference here is that DART's evidence trail happens to be unusually well documented, independently verified by competing nations and unrelated scientific institutions, and currently still being checked by an entirely separate follow-up spacecraft mission. It's one of the rare cases where checking the skepticism against the actual paper trail leads pretty clearly back to the mission being exactly what it was always announced to be. So there it is, the real story of DART, and the conspiracy theories that grew up around one of the most genuinely successful planetary defense tests in human history. Sometimes the truth really is the less dramatic option, but in this case, humanity successfully redirected an asteroid for the first time ever, and proved we could do it again if we ever really needed to, is a pretty remarkable headline all on its own, conspiracy or not. If you've made it through both episodes of this series, let me know in the comments what mission or space conspiracy you want fact-checked next. Like, subscribe, and hype the video, and I'll see you in the next one.